A pleasant day, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start our discussion, I would like to introduce first myself. I am Private Maita Denaira S. Gumiran, 953827 Infantry, Philippine Army. Presently assigned at 105th Community Defense Center, 1st Regional Community Defense Group, Army Reserve Command. Before we start our discussion, let's have first the house rules. Make sure that the audio of your gadgets are muted and do not off your cameras. This is to monitor you if you are focusing on our online class. If you have questions, please put it in a comment box and we will answer you right away. Stay alert because there are activities that were inserted in this video. Your answer will be part of your attendance. For our safety precautions, in case of fire, go immediately to the fire exit. If you feel sudden earthquake, just do the drop, cover, and hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, our topic for today is all about gender and development awareness. The objectives of our topic is first, is understand the historical background of gender and development evolution. Second, learn and identify the different international and local mandates on gender development. And third, define gender and development. Fourth, distinguish the difference between the concepts of sex and gender. Fifth, define gender biases and its different manifestations. Sixth, realize what makes gender biases continue to exist and what maintains it. 7 is to define what is gendered issue and how it resulted from gender biases. And lastly, familiarize the GAD core principles and know the end of goal of GAD. For the scope of our presentation, we are going to tackle the gender and development evolution, the international GAD legal mandates. We have also the local GAD legal mandates, the basic concepts related to gender and development, the sex versus gender, the acquisition of gender rules and identities, gender differences theories, and the gender biases, vehicles in transmitting gender biases, how gender biases result to gender issues, and responding to gender issues through GAD. The references of our topic are shown in the slides. To start our topic, let us have first this question. Why is there a need to do GAD?
Gender inequality doesn't make sense on any level. By marginalizing the rights of women, we deny ourselves the opportunity to lift millions of men, women, and children out of poverty, not to mention the chance of a just and fair world. From birth, girls and boys, women and men are expected by society to play certain roles and behave in certain ways based on traditions, religion, and other beliefs. These behaviors are learned and shape the gender norms in a society. Unfortunately, in many countries, gender norms create disadvantages for women. Often, girls are not sent to school. When they become women, they then have limited ability to earn money or realize their potential. Rural women play a major role in agricultural development. However, in many developing countries, women cannot formally own land. Without land, they cannot get loans to invest in their farms or businesses. This also means they have no control over the use of land or the benefits that come from it. Men generally control the household decisions, like how to use the family's assets. These disadvantages are often reinforced by practices that limit women's access to services, like training. Cultural beliefs can also restrict women's opportunities, such as in parts of Zambia where women cannot paddle their boats as it is considered bad omen. The result of these issues? Women remain poor and agricultural production cannot reach its potential, perpetuating poverty and hunger in the developing world. The social norms that limit women's opportunities need to be understood and then changed. By taking a gender transformative approach, we can influence social norms and bridge the gaps in access to resources and services between men and women in a lasting manner. Change is needed on many levels, and both men and women must be involved for it to happen. Research and development organizations need to invest in programs that promote gender equality alongside improving productivity and incomes. Policies need to be implemented that increase women's access to services and resources. Communities need to support women as farmers and as leaders. Increasing women's voice and agency is a valuable end in its own right. When development organizations, policies, and communities support the success of women, we have a chance to reduce extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity for girls and boys, women and men around the world.
The God Evolution and Legal Mandates. The purpose of this subject is for you to learn how gender and development evolve through implementation of different development approaches designed to attain gender inequality and women empowerment. Historical background and legal framework of GATT. On October 24, 1945, the United Nations Charter mandates signatory members to promote and encourage fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and was followed by the establishment of the Commission on the Status of Women on June 24, 1946. The Commission on the Status of Women was the first global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and empowerment of women. In 1948, the first official worldwide recognitions of women's equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex was established when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 10, 1948. The Declaration is the first global recognition that there are basic, inalienable rights and fundamental freedoms that apply to every human being, including that of women with respect to their rights to equality in marriage and family relations and right to special care and assistance. As a result of the UDHR, the welfare approach was developed in 1950s. This highlighted the protection of women in performing their reproductive functions, focusing on healthcare and nutrition. However, as a woman's role evolved from purely reproductive to productive, another issue confronting women with respect to their productive roles emerged. Hence, in 1970s, the debate moved beyond women's equality and the domestic sphere of women's role as wives and mothers onto the global stage, where the role of women was promoted as an aid for economic development. As a result, the Women in Development approach emerged. The Women in Development approach was based on liberal feminist framework, particularly influential in North America. The Women in Development approach focuses on the integration of women into the workforce, which increases their level of productivity, thereby improving their lives as women's significant productive contribution was made visible. Their reproductive role, on the other hand, was downplayed. Hence, the women in development fell short in improving unequal relationships. A significant number of projects were unsustainable, as development projects failed to consider the multiple roles carried out by women, leading to a development model that eventually became disadvantageous to women. The ultimate goal of development approaches is to attain gender equality. However, in attaining gender equality, an analysis of traditional gender roles of men and women needs to be done. Traditionally, women were given reproductive roles, while men were given productive roles. With the introduction of the Women in Development approach, which highlighted women's role in economic development, women were given productive roles. Women started working and helped the men in providing the needs of the family. Unfortunately, the role of men in the family remained. Men were not taught to share in the workload of women at home. This resulted to multiple burden on the part of the woman. 5 years later, another development approach were made, the Women and Development. It was conceptualized in 1975. The Women and Development originated in Mexico and highlighted the relation between patriarchy and capitalism. The Women and Development focused on the relationship between women and development processes, rather than purely strategies that seek women's integration in development. Unfortunately, Women's in Development was unsuccessful in bridging the gap in power relations between women and men, as the said development approach, like the Women's in Development, only focused on women. The Women and Development also tended to group women together without considering the impact of class, race, or ethnicity on women's status. Hence, in the late 1980s, a growing need to understand the unequal status and treatment of women and men and the failure of development initiatives to advance women's status emerged. This clamor led to the development of a new approach. It is the Gender and Development. Gender and Development was developed in the response to the lack of progress of women's in development and women's and development in changing women's lives and influencing the broader development agenda. In challenge, the Women's in Development and Women's and Development focus on women in isolation and seeing women's real problem as the imbalance of power between women and men. In achieving gender equality and women's empowerment, there is a need to look into traditional roles of women and men. Traditionally, women were given reproductive roles, while men were given productive roles. The assignment of gender roles created limitations on what a woman can do and what she can become in the future. This later led to power imbalance and inequity as a woman were merely confined in the four corners of her home, while the men were exposed to the economic and political world. As a result, men had more access to resources and opportunities than women. With the introduction of gender and development, wherein women were encouraged to become economically independent, they were given equal access to resources and opportunities. Men, on the other hand, were also taught to share in the reproductive roles of women, thereby achieving one of the rights guaranteed under the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the right to shared parenting responsibilities. The sharing of both reproductive and productive roles of women and men will be definitely result to power balance and equality. As I've given the illustration, it is clear that the God is not concerned specifically with women, but with the way the society assign roles, responsibilities, and expectations to women and men, as this assignment resulted to an imbalance of power. If gender is about relations between men and women, then the male side of the equation must also be figured in. If women's gender identities are to be changed, then men's must change also. Now let us proceed to the legal mandates. First, we have the CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. CEDAW is an international instrument adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly and is described as the International Bill of Rights for Women, as it defines what constitutes discrimination against women and sets up an agenda for national action to end such discrimination.
CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, is an international human rights treaty that focuses on women's rights and women's issues worldwide. It follows the following three principles: substantive equality, non-discrimination, and state obligation. This video explains the principle of state obligation. The CEDAW Convention is one of the most widely ratified United Nations treaties worldwide. 188 countries have ratified the CEDAW Convention. For example, country Z has signed the CEDAW Convention. This means that the government in country Z is a state party to CEDAW and has agreed to take measures to improve women's status in the country. In a democratic country, there are three branches of power: legislative, executive, and the judiciary. The legislature makes, amends, and repeals laws. It also controls national finances or budgets. The executive branch enforces the laws and runs the government of the day. It is also responsible for the implementation of laws and delivering of services such as education and welfare. The judiciary is responsible for administration of justice and interpreting the Constitution and various laws. Therefore, in Country Z, these three branches must work hand in hand to achieve gender equality. When Country Z ratified the CEDAW Convention, it became a legally binding document. The state is obligated to subscribe to the articles of the convention and effectively implement it as soon as possible. Every 4 years, states have to report to the CEDAW Committee on the measures taken to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of women in their countries based on the convention. The state has to respect the rights of women. It cannot do anything that violates women's rights, such as enact discriminatory laws or engage in discriminatory practices. The state must also repeal all discriminatory laws. The state has to protect the rights of women. It must ensure that there are mechanisms for complaints and redress, regulate private actors such as businesses, corporations, or even individuals to ensure that they do not violate women's rights, prohibit discrimination, and impose sanctions against discriminatory acts. The state has to promote the rights of women. It must raise awareness of women's rights in the country. The state has to fulfill the rights of women. It must take positive steps and provide enabling conditions, develop capacity of its institutions, and build women's ability to ensure equality. It must also remove hurdles that women face to ensure both de jure and de facto equality. This means that the state also has an obligation to implement temporary special measures. These are measures taken to give temporary advantages to women in order to accelerate women's equality and address historical discrimination. For example, despite schools being built and equipped with teachers in the rural areas in Country Z, it was found that girls were not coming to school. This example is based on a real-life scenario. Upon investigation, it was found that since the majority of teachers were men, and due to cultural practices, the families were not willing to allow their daughters to be around men. Secondly, the family relied on the labor of female children to take care of household responsibilities. In rural areas, families feel that girls' education is not as important as household chores, and she will later be married into another family. They feel it's a waste of resources to educate girls. The state is responsible to ensure that the education of girls is just as important. As a temporary special measure until the environment is corrected, the government should put in place a policy to recruit more female teachers in rural schools and to give the family a stipend to compensate for the loss of labor of the female children. They should also pass laws to make it compulsory for girls to attend schools. Other examples of temporary special measures include reserving some seats in decision-making positions for women. If women make up half of the population, women's voices must be represented in decision-making positions so that their interests are not left out. In summary, the state party to the CEDAW Convention must act with due diligence, which means that the state is accountable for all discrimination against women, whether she is in the private or public sphere. To prevent discrimination, prohibit discrimination, identify discrimination and provide redress, impose sanctions against discriminatory acts, promote women's rights and equality through proactive measures, and accelerate de facto equality. This video covers the principle of state obligation, one of 3 CEDAW principles. This video explains the principle of non-discrimination. Most countries around the world have signed the CEDAW Convention. This means that they have given their commitment to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights of women in their respective countries. However, discrimination still exists in many countries, both directly and indirectly. Many countries practice nationality laws that directly discriminate against women and children. For example, fathers are allowed by law to transfer their citizenship to their children, but mothers cannot. Without citizenship, the child is excluded from healthcare, education, and other services offered to citizens. Indirect discrimination comes from gender-neutral laws and policies which seem to give equal opportunities and access to both men and women. But in practice, women are disadvantaged due to historical discrimination caused by the patriarchal system. For example, a newspaper company is hiring an editor and invites both men and women reporters to apply on condition that the candidate must have served in all the different news desks before. But this indirectly disqualifies all the women reporters, as there is another policy that disallows women from serving on the crime desk due to the high risk involved. As a result, no women can apply for the job. Patriarchy is a social system in which the role of the male as the primary authority figure is central to social organization, and where fathers hold authority over women, children, and property. It implies the institution of male rule and privilege, and is dependent on female subordination. In the patriarchy system, male traits are more valued than female traits. For example, you will often hear boys and men being told not to be a girl. This happens because patriarchy views womanhood as weakness, and it is valued less compared to men. In many countries, women face obstacles due to cultural and religious practices. As a result of these beliefs and practices, women have suffered historical discrimination. For example, female genital mutilation, a practice where part of the female genitalia is cut or disfigured, has been defended as a religious responsibility or a traditional passage to womanhood. However, it has been proven that unlike male circumcision, female genital mutilation offers no benefits to the women and can cause medical complications and in some cases results in death. It is important to keep in mind that non-discrimination for women must exist in de jure and de facto. De jure means of law, and de facto means of fact, meaning what is actually happening in reality. For example, there is a fish farm project in the village of Loma. The policy states that it would provide equal opportunities to women and men to become farmers and better their livelihoods. All parts of training will be available to everybody, but one of the conditions states that applicants must have some farmland to work in. During implementation, no women participated. It is found that women do not own farmlands in the village, as the inheritance laws were discriminatory and did not allow women to inherit property. The local culture also prohibits women to control or access family income or assets, including their husbands' farms. A lot of laws and policies exist which is supposed to benefit women, but did not take into account the historical discrimination that prohibits women from enjoying those rights. Chances are such policies also exist in your country in a multiple of scenarios. This video covers the principle of non-discrimination, one of 3 CEDAW principles. This video explains the principle of substantive equality. There are many contributing reasons to inequality. Some people are born with much more access and opportunities as compared to others. Gender stereotypes enforce the difference between men and women. It labels women as weak and in need of protection. But in reality, both men and women share the same traits except for reproductive capabilities. Women and men are different, but ultimately, we're equal. Inequality between men and women is also reinforced by the patriarchy system that sees men as leaders. Some people argue that men should have greater rights to economic resources because they have the responsibility of providing for their family. However, this belief does not match reality. Today, women are unmarried, divorced, widowed, or otherwise separated or abandoned by circumstances and are the sole providers. In Southeast Asia, many households are headed by women. It is estimated that 70% of the world's poor are women. Equality for women can be viewed in 3 approaches: formal, protectionist, and corrective. In the formal approach, society ignores that men and women are actually different. It follows the male standards, disregarding women's special needs. For example, a factory allows men and women to take night shifts, But if the factory is not well lit, it can lead to assaults. This may discourage women from doing night shifts. In the protectionist approach, women lose opportunities because they are perceived as vulnerable and prohibited from participating in certain activities. In the same example, the factory has a policy of not employing women on night shifts to protect them from being assaulted. This does not address the problem and denies women extra income. In the corrective approach, priority is given to correct the environment in order to benefit both men and women equally. The factory could install more lights and provide transport for women in order to create a safe and enabling environment for them to work night shifts. Corrective approach leads to substantive equality. It recognizes differences but affirms equality between men and women. It places an obligation to correct the environment that disadvantages them. It evens out the playing field, and it requires laws and policies to take gender perspective into account. Substantive equality ensures that women have equality in opportunities, equality in accessing those opportunities, and equality in getting results or benefits. This video covers substantive equality, one of 3 CEDAW principles.
Addition to the UN CEDAW is all the member committed to submit national reports, at least every 4 years, on measures they have taken to comply with their treaty obligations. As a signatory to the convention, the Philippines have been reporting regularly to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Next platform is the Beijing Platform for Action. The platform was signed by the different state parties in 1995 in Beijing, China. It contains the 12 critical areas of concern that state parties must focus on the implementation of their development initiatives to uphold the rights of women and girl children. The following are the 12 critical areas of concern of Beijing Platform for Action. 1 is the poverty. 2. Education, training, and human resource development. 3. Health. 4. Violence against women. 5. Armed conflict. 6. Economy. 7. Power and decision making. 8. Human rights. 9. Media. 10. Environment. 11. Girl child. And 12. Institutional mechanism. We have also the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals are the world's time-bound and quantified targets for 2015 in addressing extreme poverty in its many dimensions. The Millennium Development Goals have 8 goals with measurable targets and clear deadlines for improving the lives of the world's poorest people. To meet these goals and eradicate poverty, leaders of 189 countries, including the Philippines, signed the historic Millennium Declarations at the United Nations Millennium Summit in 2000. The 8 goals are the following: eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. We have also the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Adopted by the world leaders in September 2015 at the historic United Nations Summit, it contains 17 Sustainable Development Goals and was released by United Nations in January 1, 2016. The Sustainable Development Goals are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and a strong institution. And last, partnership for the goals. Gender and development is covered by the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which seek to address key challenges such as poverty, inequality, and violence against women. Goal number 5 is known as the standalone goal because it is dedicated to achieving recognition to women's equality and empowerment as both the objective and as a part of the solution. Sustainable Development Goals 2030 has the following targets. End all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. Eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. Eliminate all harmful practices such as child early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation. Recognize and value unpaid care and domestic work through the provision of public services, infrastructure, and social protection policies, and the promotion of shared responsibility within the household and the family as nationally appropriate. Ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. Undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial services, inheritance, and natural resources in accordance with national laws. Enhance the use of enabling technology, in particular information and communications technology, to promote the empowerment of women. Adopt and strengthen sound policies and enforceable legislation for the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls at all levels. Lastly, is to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights as agreed in accordance with the Program of Action of the International Conference on Population and Development and the Beijing Platform for Action and the outcome documents of the review conferences. Now, let's have the GAD in the Philippines. Because of the international mandates on GAD, where the Philippines is a signatory, our country enacted laws in support to the implementation of GAD initiatives. The Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, 1987, provides that the state recognizes the role of women in nation building and shall ensure the fundamental equality before the law of women and men. In Executive Order No. 348 of 1989, it approves and adopted the Philippine Development Plan for Women for 1989 to 1992. This law mandated the creation of gender and development focal points within an agency, a sector, or a locality. We have also the Executive Order 273 of 1995. It was signed by former President Fidel V. Ramos, adopted the 1995 to 2025 Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development. The Philippine Plan for Gender Responsive Development is a 30-year-old plan of the Philippine government. This is to ensure that the gender perspective will be mainstream in its systems, structures, policies, programs, and projects. We have also the Republic Act 7192 of 1992, otherwise known as the Women in Development and Nation Building Act, which promotes the integration of women as a full and equal partners of men in development and nation building. The laws were passed by Congress of the Philippines on December 11, 1991, and was approved by the President on February 12, 1992. Plus is the Philippine National Action Plan on United Nations Social Security Council Resolutions 1325 and 1820, which is the Philippine government's response to the three landmark international normative standards on women, peace, and security, namely, Women, Peace, and Security, on addressing the issue of the widespread or systematic sexual violence in armed conflict, and designation for a special representative to the Secretary-General on ending sexual violence in armed conflict. Now let's have the sex versus gender. What is the difference between sex and gender? Sex is concerned with differentiating people based on biological attributes, such as physical, body contour, features, genitals, reproductive organs, genetic, chromosomes, hormones, and label for female or male, men or women. It is a universal and fixed, and it does not change in time or location. On the other hand, gender is concerned with differentiating people based on perceptions, rules, and social expectations. It is not concerned about femininity or masculinity. It is the characteristics, attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that society expects of females and males. Therefore, gender is learned or acquired and change from country to country or through time. So how do we learn and acquire our gender identities? We learn through gender role socialization, the lifelong process of learning to be a masculine or feminine, primarily through four main agents of socialization. It is the family, school, peers, and the media. What are the effects of gender differences? The assignment of gender roles, responsibilities, characteristics, and expectations by society created a divide between men and women, as they were put in their respective boxes. Hence, certain roles, traits, and characteristics are assigned or ascribed distinctly and strictly to women or to men. For men, we call them for macho, brave, fighter, leader, breadwinner, decision maker, polygamous, while for the women, weak, submissive, caretaker, crybaby, martyr, fickle-minded, and moody. Now let's have the gender biases and its manifestations. Let's define first the gender bias. It is a cultural beliefs, perceptions, practices, values, rules, attitudes, structural arrangement that favor one sex over the other, not on the basis of individual merits, but on what society recognizes as having greater value. It emphasizes that gender bias refers to the different treatment and valuing of men and women. It is not found in cultural beliefs, but also in the perceptions, practices, values, and attitudes of the people in the society. Because of this differential treatment and values given on men and women, certain structural arrangements are made to favor to men, not because of merit, but because of the outdated and traditional view that men are superior than women. This unfair treatment results to discrimination of women. So what are the manifestations of gender bias? According to Gender and Development, there are 6 manifestations of gender biases. These are the economic marginalization, political subordination, gender stereotyping, gender division of labor, double or multiple burden, and gender-based violence. Economic marginalization. This happens when women's work, especially the reproductive functions of childbearing, child rearing, and family care and housework are not considered as directly contributing to economic development, making their output unrecognized and undervalued. It also happens when women are considered as non-essential force in the economy, despite their crucial role in production.
重いです。結構重いですね。
出ました。
いや2キロぐらいかなと思って、結構重いんですね。
出かけるとき何持ってってる？
もうほぼ科学のものだよね。今だったらもうおむつ、着替え、飲み物、で反対に自分のものってじゃあ何持ってんの？
いや、カバンの中には財布、携帯、ノートとかで普段、
それしかないんだ。
それしかないね、大体。
もう洗濯箱がずっしり重く感じます。掃除機もとっても時間がかかるので、そういう時はもう、抱っこしてしまったりとか、ここら辺ちょっと坂が多いので、いつもよいしょよいしょって言いながら2人で声かけて上がってます。行くよー。よいしょよいしょ。はるくん30分くらいこうやっておんぶしながら料理してるのが結構きつくて痛いですね。やっぱただでさえ下向いて料理してるので、そこにずっしりかかってしゃがむのも一苦労で、とにかく体はいつもカチカチです。ねんねしてかなくん、もう疲れたよな、まだ。
大変ですね。こうやって改めてというか、普段は日中ね、家にないんで、妻が何をしてるかっていうのは全然想像できないんですけど、こうやって改めてね、見させていただくと、それはとてもすごく、実感しますね。はい。今ね、朝子が日中にどんなことをしてるかっていうのを映像で見させてもらって、いや、いつも大変だなと思ってちょっと見させてもらったんだけど、ちょっとね、それで思いのことをね、ちょっと手紙で
何それ
書いてきたんで、
ちょっと待って。
初めて朝子が日中どれだけ大変かが分かりました。 彼方と荷物、そしてベビーカーでの外出、買い物、うちでは抱っこしながらの料理、洗濯と当たり前のことかもしれないけれど、こうして映像を見るととても身に染みます。小さい体でいつもありがとう。ほとんどうちにいることが少ないので、いつも任せっぱなしですね。一緒にいるときはもっと無理せず甘えてね。いつもいつも本当にありがとう。たかし。
ありがとうこれからもよろしくお願いします。
なんかこれで少しでもちょっと肩こりとかが和らげれば。なんかペタペタっとしてる。ペタペタ。大きい。
Political subordination. This refers to the act of imposing that power and leadership in the home, community, workplace, and in the society must be occupied by men. This often results in women having no control over available resources and in having no personal autonomy. Subordination happens when the society is preventing or blocking the person from going up the ladder because of his or her sex, by use of force or violence, or simply by being under the authority of one sex.
Some of the most common occupations in the country, truck driving, construction, secretarial work, and nursing, are almost completely segregated by gender. Even some professions that require a high level of education, such as engineering, law, and medicine, are heavily skewed towards men. Why is that? One reason is that the occupations women dominate are in some way similar to the work they have historically done at home: childcare, nursing, and teaching, for example. Men, on the other hand, are more likely to go into professions that are not associated with domestic work, such as construction and engineering. Some of this segregation is the result of personal choice, likes and dislikes, as well as socialization from childhood. Some is due to sexism by employers and competition between employees of different genders. However, it's still the case that male-dominated jobs pay more than female-dominated jobs, even when they require the same level of skills and training. Job segregation is not simply a matter of personal preferences. It's an important part of the story of gender inequality in society.
Gender stereotyping. Gender stereotyping refers to the giving of automatic labels, characteristics, or rules to men and women that are dictated by culture and society. It is the society's perceptions and value system that instill an image of women as weak, dependent, subordinate, indecisive, emotional, and submissive. Men, on the other hand, are strong, independent, powerful, dominant, decisive, and logical. These are also unexamined images, ideas, or beliefs associated with particular group that have become fixed in a person's mind and are not open to change. For example, women's rules, functions, and abilities are seen to be primarily tied up to the home.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for their daily races, going nowhere, and their tears are filling up their glasses. No expression, no expression. Mad world, mad world.
Gender division of labor. The allocation of differential tasks, roles, responsibilities, and activities to women and men according to what is considered socially and culturally appropriate. Multiple burden. A situation referring to the heavy workload of women and the many overlapping tasks involved, which, if computed in terms of hours, would total more than 24 hours. It also refers to the assumption and performance of several tasks and responsibilities of women. For example, even if women hold jobs outside the home, essentially putting in the same working hours as the men, and participants in community activities, housework, and child family care are still primarily considered as women's concern. Gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is an umbrella term for any harm that is perpetrated against a person's will as a result of power inequities based on gender roles. Gender-based violence includes the following: the physical abuse, psychological abuse, economic abuse, sexual abuse.
Another pandemic is raging in our country.
No time, no.
Freedom cannot be achieved unless the women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression.
Dowry-related violence, and even the discriminatory cultural practices, the female genital mutilation, or known as FGM.
Female genital mutilation affects at least 200 million women globally. That is the equivalent of the population of the UK and France. FGM is the cutting and removal of parts of the female genitalia. Mammy gives birth to a baby girl. She names her Mary. Mary undergoes FGM at the age of 2. The procedure has no health benefits, but can cause serious health complications and can even lead to death. FGM was banned in Senegal in 1999. But despite the ban, it still takes place. It causes extreme pain and has severe health consequences, including difficulties during childbirth. Girls are cut in unsanitary conditions, with unsterilized equipment and without anesthesia. Mary is now a teenager. Girls and women who underwent FGM can experience severe menstrual pain and infections. Mary is married now. One of the consequences of FGM can be intense pain during intercourse. Mary almost died while giving birth. The complications associated with FGM can stay with a woman throughout her life. Mary survived and had a baby girl. She named her Fatoumata. The cycle of FGM continues.
There is this culture of ours that we have been inheriting, that our forefathers has been doing.
They chocolate everything until it was flat. Actually, it was flat and red.
These women have been through an experience that we can't even imagine.
It was the pain and the bleeding after that.
What is too harsh? I'll ruin a little girl's life, take all of her organs, cut them off. So she's just like a shell, just walking.
Would we accept a human right violation under the world of culture?
The underlying cause of FGM is to control women's sexuality.
My mum had to pay her extra for using a new razor.
It's just a heartless thing to do to a human being.
Eventually, FGM will be completely wiped out.
We won't back down, and we won't go away.
How are these gender biases transmitted from one generation to another generation? Individuals' consciousness through the following vehicles are the reasons of the transmitting of gender biases. We have the family, school, church, and tri-media, and even government. Family. The family is a vehicle in transmitting gender biases, as the child's first learning experiences occur at home. Most of the time, it is the parents who transmit gender stereotypes to their children. As children learn what they see from their parents, they will believe that it's normal to value and treat women and men differently.
ये देखो शील्ड लेग हेलमेट
होमवर्क हो गया
मम्मी ये देखो
फिर दाग लगा दिया पापा ये लीजिए आपके घर जाने की टिकट हेलो या आई एम जस्ट गोइंग टू सेंड यू द ईमेल इन 5 मिनट्स या गिव मी 5 मिनट्स आई एम वर्किंग ऑन द प्रेजेंट
मेरी छोटी सी गुड़िया कितनी बड़ी हो गई घर घर खेलती थी अब घर संभालती है ऑफिस संभालती है आई एम सो प्राउड एंड आई एम सो सॉरी सॉरी कि ये सब तुम्हें अकेले करना पड़ता है सॉरी कि जब तुम घर घर खेलती थी तो मैंने तुम्हें रोका नहीं ये नहीं कहा कि ये सिर्फ तुम्हारा काम नहीं है तुम्हारे हस्बैंड का भी है पर कहता भी कैसे है
और मेरी ग्रीन शर्ट धो देना
मैंने भी तो कभी तुम्हारी मम्मी की हेल्प नहीं की और तुमने जो देखा वही सीखा तुम्हारे हस्बैंड ने भी बचपन में यही देखा होगा घर घर खेलते वक्त वो टीवी देखने की या न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ने की एक्टिंग करता होगा और तुम जैसी कोई छोटी सी लड़की चाय बनाने की एक्टिंग करती होगी उसके डैड की तरफ से सॉरी तुम्हारे डैड की तरफ से सॉरी और हर उस डैड की तरफ से सॉरी जिसने कई कई सालों से एक गलत एग्जाम्पल सेट किया है पर अभी भी देर नहीं हुई इस सॉरी के साथ मैं अपनी तरफ से एक छोटी सी कोशिश करूंगा कि घर के काम में मम्मी की हेल्प करूं किचन का किंग ना बन पाऊं तो कम से कम लॉन्ड्री में तो हाथ बटाऊं इतने साल एक गलत एग्जाम्पल सेट किया है अब कुछ सही कर जाऊं तुम्हारा पापा
School. Although education is now equally accessible to both males and females, our educational system still encourages gender bias as shown in our current textbooks and curricula, which still uses stereotype images, exclusive language, and portray traditional career options that children should take on when they grow up. Moreover, teachers who has not yet been gender sensitized tend to channel to their students gender-appropriate behaviors and activities. Trimedia. Trimedia is another vehicle in transmitting gender biases. Our trimedia consists of print, broadcast, and social media. There are several misinterpretations of gender roles of women and men in our trimedia. Trimedia is also an instrument in the devaluing of women's dignity and commodification of her body. Gender roles of women and men are misinterpreted in our media. For example, women are commonly portrayed in media as submissive, dependent, and the primary caregivers, while the men are portrayed as the ones in authority, independent, and the primary breadwinners. Moreover, women are also depicted as helpless, dependent, incompetent, and weak, and therefore always the victim. On the other hand, men are pictured as strong, in authority, influential, and therefore always the aggressor. So why are the women always portrayed by media as the victim and men as the aggressor? The answer is simply because our society still abhors men who are weak. In fact, if men show signs of weakness, they are labeled as girly, sissy, or gay. In addition, the misrepresentations of the gender roles of women and men in media is highlighted in several stereotypical images. Men are recognized to be the Adonis if they have a muscular bodies, while women are tagged as Diosa if they have a body like that of a Barbie doll. So I have here a picture. I will give you 5 seconds to think and to describe what do you see in the picture. Write your answers in the chat box. So I presume that everyone has already their answers. Some of you might think that it is a human body part, but it is only a picture of a wine glass. Going back to our topic, stereotype depiction of a woman and a man's body result to the devaluing and commodification of a human body. Unfortunately, it is always that of the woman's body that is severely devalued and commodified, because sexual products, sexual and erotic images of a woman are the most prominent characteristic presented in advertising. The bigger problem is when people consider the devaluing commodification and disrespect of woman's body as an economic opportunity rather as a form of exploitation. Women who are reluctant to speak out will continue to participate in the cycle of exploitation, and when they become mothers, they will have a tendency to raise their children in the same paradigm that will result to disordered of images of men and women. Gender biases such as marginalization, subordination, gender stereotyping, gender division of labor, multiple burden, and gender-based violence result to gender issues. Why? Because gender biases result to unequal treatment, status, and conditions of women and men. The end goal of God is to empower people, standing on an equal level of playing field regardless of gender. Our beliefs, ideas, attitudes, behavior, and even the systems that we create that are tainted with our gender biases against women and men are the cause of gender issues which block people's capacity to do and capacity to be. As a gender issue affects everybody, men or women, rich or poor, young and old, it is not a high time that we call on the call. Both men and women should feel free to be strong. It is the time we all perceive gender as a spectrum, not as a two opposing set of ideals. So how do we address gender issues? The answer is simply implementation of gender and development initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 1 hour, we have already tackled the gender and development evolution, the international GAD legal mandates, the local GAD legal mandates, sex versus gender. We have also tackled the gender bias, the vehicles in transmitting gender biases, and responding to gender issue through GAD. Before we end, I want you to answer this question in 150 words. Considering that gender refers to culturally defined attitudes, behaviors, and social positions of men and women that the society expects from them, can we change gender roles and identities of men and women? And why? Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our discussion on gender and development awareness. For your questions and clarifications, just feel free to send us your message.